Okay.
Now wait for 1, 2, Hare Krishna.
Om Agyanatimanandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So today I was looking for quotes on the internet about judging others based on, externals. Because that's what this verse from the Nectar of Instruction talks about. And then I found out that Jean de La Fontaine, does that ring a bell? Yeah, Jean de La Fontaine. He's like this really famous poet, this French poet who wrote these rhymes, stories of like animals who speak to each other with a moral story at the end. So he apparently, Jean de La Fontaine, I used to read him when I was a kid. I mean, every kid in France has to study or has to read Jean de La Fontaine. It's like centuries old. And so he made this statement that, make sure not to judge others based on appearances. And I was like, oh, Jean de La Fontaine said that. And the reason why I was looking for quotes about this theme is because the verse that we're going to talk about today, which is not the Bhagavad Gita. Now the Bhagavad Gita is like kind of like the Bible of Hinduism in general, and the Bible of the sacred text par excellence of the Bhakti yoga tradition, the tradition of devotion that you find in the ancient Indian traditions. So we're not going to talk about the Gita. I mean, I had a choice between speaking on the Gita, we call it in short, the Gita, or speak on a text which was written much later, only about 500 years ago, called the Sri Ishopanishad, Upadeshamrita, which literally means the essence of all teachings, the essence of all advice, the essence of all instructions. And so today we're reading this verse number 6, and before we go into the verse, I want to kind of bring you guys to the context, to the historical, social context when this text was written. Why? Because, for example, if you go today to any Christian church, if you go to Notre Dame, for example, or the cathedral here when it's open, whether you're a woman or a man or black or white, or you come from a lower social rung in society or higher rung in society, the doors are open. I mean, that's a commonly understood thing, right, in the Christian world. And there's very little, if not, it's completely non-existent, any sort of like fixed, social structures in the sense of like anywhere near like a caste system in the Western world, in Europe today or in America. Centuries ago you did have, before the Industrial Revolution, and in Europe you had the sort of what we could consider to be some sort of like, father to son, traditions of blacksmith and traditions of politicians and they had like very sort of rigid sort of social structures. But in today's society it's kind of like exploded. So what we're going to read here may seem to us like obvious, but 500 years ago, and in the context of a very strict social hierarchy of India, of medieval India, from which this entire tradition that we represent, stems from, as they say in French, c'était pas évident. It wasn't so obvious as it would be for us today, India in the 16th century, was under Muslim rule, but it was very stratified. And when it comes to like religious access or access to God, I mean, you did find this in the Catholic Church, and that's why the whole Protestant Revolution came, where, Luther and company said, no, why should there be such a strong via media of the priest in order to get to God? We can have a direct relationship to God, and why should we give money to the priest so that they can do whatever they want with it, and then we get so-called purified of our sins? So we find that in India about 500 years ago, you had this very strong structure of what's called the Brahmin class. Is that ringing a bell with anyone? The Brahmanas? Brahmanas are the equivalent of the priests or the intellectuals of any given society. And so there was this very strong sense, which is still, you still see it in religious circles in India today. I mean, for example, if you go to a famous temple of many temples in India, because you're white, you're Croatian, Caucasian, you can't go inside. Even if you're let's say a practicing Bhakti yogi or Bhakti yogini, practicing devotee of Krishna, they see your skin, your skin color. Sorry, you can't. And you can say, but I practice. I have a plant-based diet. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I believe in the teachings of the Vedas. Right. So you had this very strong caste system where the Brahmins, the caste Brahmins, were the sort of the equivalent of the stereotypical, and of course not all Brahmins, but you had a strong sort of monopoly of access to God. That unless you're born in a particular caste, the Brahmin caste, you really can't understand God. You can't really access God.
Similar like Judaism.
Similar like Judaism.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, similar like the chosen people, exactly. Yeah, the chosen people. So it's in this context, right, that we see, and it's interesting because historically, the Krishna tradition, the Hare Krishna movement, is seen as being part of Lord Chaitanya's famous renouveau of this devotional fervor that we find, scriptural roots thousands of years back. The thing that he's noted for, or that the tradition is noted for, is that of sort of a rebellion against the status quo of strict Brahminical, establishment. It's interesting, huh? The Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was seen like that, as a rebel against, Brahminical establishment. So now we can, now that we know a little bit of the context, we can read this verse together. And what I'll do is we'll read the translation, and then there's a few passages that I picked that I'll comment on from the commentary to this particular verse, which was written. The commentary was written by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. You can see his little statue on the bottom left of the altar there with his finger like this. He's the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and he translated and commented on the main texts that we in this room who practice Bhakti Yoga read on a regular basis. But the text itself, which was written about 500 years ago, was written by someone called Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami is kind of like the Paul of Christianity, Paul, like, how do you say?
Sveti Pavel.
Pavel,
Sveti Pavel.
Pavel, right?
Yeah.
So Pavel for Christianity is kind of like what Rupa Goswami is for the Bhakti Yoga tradition. And so this book that he wrote, which is a very small book with 11 texts, 11 instructions, is one of the most important, cardinal texts in the Bhakti Yoga tradition. As a matter of fact, it's one of the 4 books that I teach, for example, and other centers of education around the world teach in this course called the Bhakti Shastri course, where you study the Bhagavad Gita, and this one it's so important. So, here's the Sanskrit, which I also don't understand, because I tried to learn Sanskrit a few times, I couldn't, but it sounds beautiful. And it goes like this. Drishtai svabhava janitar vapushascha doshar na prakritattvamiha bhakta janasya pashyet gangam bhasam nakalu buddhafena pankair brahmadravatvam apagacchati niradharmai. So here's the translation. There's a few words in here that are mentioned, and so I want to just define them quickly. For you're here for the first time, for example. there's this idea of a devotee. Okay, a devotee, or even a pure devotee. So what is this, Well, it comes from the Latin word devoto, someone who has devotion, who is devoted to, and that means, devoted to God. Ciao, speaking of Italian. So this notion of devotee, which can be a woman or a man, because devota, it would be the feminine, is someone who is, living a God-conscious life, who's dedicated, who has devotion to God. All right? And the pure devotee is a soul who has sort of gotten rid, by the grace of God, of stuff that are not so cool for our happy living in this world, like, anger and greediness and jealousy and, lust and stuff like that. And who really has reawakened or awakened, some very deep love for the divine, for God, and therefore can be considered pure, a pure devotee. Okay, so that's just a definition here. And the rest of the verse talks about the Ganges River. Who's never heard of the Ganges River? Everyone's heard of it. So the Ganges River, which flows, in India, is considered by all followers of the Vedic tradition as a very sacred river, a river that has its origin, beyond matter, beyond the temporary small planet Earth, and which has purifying effects on whoever bathes in the Ganges. That's why, still today you have people who bathe in the Ganges and they feel like they're getting washed off of sins. Okay, so now that we've defined these few words, here's the translation from Rupa Goswami. And then Krishna is the name for God. So, being situated in his original Krishna conscious position, a pure devotee does not identify with the body. Such a devotee should not be seen from a materialistic point of view. Indeed, one should overlook a devotee's having a body born in a low family, a body with a bad complexion, a deformed body, or a diseased or infirm body. According to ordinary vision, such imperfections may seem prominent in the body of a pure devotee, but despite such seeming defects, the body of a pure devotee cannot be polluted. It is exactly like the waters of the Ganges, which sometimes during the rainy season are full of bubbles, foam, and mud. And now, chemicals from New Delhi factories. Or from Calcutta factories. The Ganges waters do not become polluted. They actually made some experiment. You can see it on Google. They're still figuring it out. Bacteria doesn't really grow in the Ganges water. There's historical records of people who did trade from India to Europe and stuff. They would bring Ganges water because the water would not go bad over the months and months of travel. It's kind of far out. So the Ganges water does not become polluted. Those who are advanced in spiritual understanding will bathe in the Ganges without considering the condition of the water. So what's revolutionary about here is that you have this class of people, right, who are saying, you can't access God, kind of like maybe the Jews or the Catholic priests, you can't go to God except through us. And here comes, someone like Rupa Goswami says, no, wait a second. Better, more advanced, much more important than what family you're born in is the condition of your consciousness, how pure your consciousness is. And if your consciousness is pure and connected to the divine, then everything else material is completely secondary. your gender, your skin of your color, what social class you belong to, educated, not educated, rich, poor, completely secondary. And therefore, and this is where it becomes like, wow, that person who is advanced spiritually speaking, regardless of what body they're in, what caste they belong to, should not be judged, should not be discriminated against based on that bodily configuration. So this is just like a total, it's kind of very much like the Protestant Reformation standing up against the Catholic Church. You have, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the founder of the Bhakti tradition, who's considered to be Krishna himself, appearing again in 1486, and his first, followers, his first apostles, like Rupa Goswami here, who's saying, because bhakti, because devotion is something that is completely intrinsic to the soul, and because the soul, by definition, is pure and has nothing to do with what body you're in, someone who is situated in pure devotion should be seen for what he or she is, which is a pure servant of God. Basta. Basta. And so therefore Rupa says such a devotee should not be seen from a materialistic point of view. Like, oh, you're a woman, or oh, you're not a Brahmin, right? And we see examples in history of the Bhakti tradition of individuals who broke this very strict rule, both centuries ago and even in the 1960s and 70s. For example, with followers of Srila Prabhupada in the context of India in the 1970s, as he actually mentions in this commentary, there were people who were really upset. Like, for example, before talking about an example of Prabhupada, a few centuries after Rupa, you have the example of Narottam Das Thakur. And he was not from a Brahmin family. He was from a sort of a mediocre, so-called, these are all relative considerations anyway. Right? High class, low class, how much love for God do you have? That's the bottom line. What's your character? Right? It's interesting because the Bhagavatam has some predictions of this age we live in, right? And one of them is that, a person will be considered very high class if he has a lot of money. So if you have a lot of money, oh, you're a real gentleman. And, forget that you are immoral in your behavior and everything. But if you have a lot of money, oh, bravo. But if you're, poor, but you're noble, you have noble character, who is this person? That's the age we live in. So this Narottam Das, we're talking about 17th century. He was not from a Brahmin family, but he was so exalted, he started giving initiation, like initiating. There's this idea of getting an initiation ceremony where you actually kind of officially get connected to a lineage of teachers going up centuries. So he himself was not a Brahmin, because only Brahmins can do that kind of work, right? And he would give initiation to Brahmins, to children of higher castes. And that was just like a scandal, scandal. But he did it. And fast forward, 400 years to, 1970s, Prabhupada would, give what's called Brahminical initiation or second initiation to, Americans and Europeans who in some way can be seen as descendant of the great kings of ancient India, but also can also be seen as, very low class, untouchables, so-called, according to this very superficial, strict Indian classification system. And so you had, caste Brahmins, in other words, Brahmins born in these families, generation after generation, regardless of whatever their, character is like, who actually, criticized Prabhupada. How dare you, give this Brahminical initiation to, these Americans and Europeans who are not born in India, what to speak of in Brahmin families, right? But Prabhupada, following in this ethos of our tradition, would say, no. If you are devoted to God, you're much better than any, priest who's just doing the ritual because it's his job or because he was born in the family and, he's just doing it because he's just doing it. Of course, you can also be part of a high-class family and also be very devoted to God, and that's great, You have a so-called high material birth and also devotion to God. Fantastic. So it's not, we're not like here, bashing all priests or all Brahmins, but only those who are racist, basically. Only those who are racist, those who go against this idea, which you find really already as a foundation of, of Christianity, this universal message. Devotion to God transcends any material consideration. And it's just like the Ganges River. So the idea, if you have some faith in the Ganges, in the sanctity of the Ganges River, when you swim in the Ganges, you've never been to India yet. So you go there and, like I was there for the COVID lockdown, and it was rainy season. So I really saw what Rupa Goswami was talking about, like the Ganges was full of mud and bubbles, but you still went in and swam. And so you can have a sort of a materialistic view and say, oh, the water has mud, so therefore it's contaminated. Or you can have some faith that this water is special, and no matter how much mud, and now of course if there's tons and tons of chemicals from factories, even the most, courageous would have hesitancy to swim in there. So where does, like foam and mud is, I've always scratched myself and asked that question, foam and mud is one thing, but what about like super heavy?
500 years ago that was not consideration.
Exactly, it was not a consideration, but it is now. But you get the point, right? The Ganges River is clean always, no matter what's inside. So similarly, if you're inspired by a spiritual teacher who's a woman, or who's a man, or who's black, or who's, from a Muslim background, or who, is limping, like Madhuchan. I spent 2 days at a friend's. We have a friend called Madhuchan, and he since childhood he had some experimental drugs given to him, and so he limps. So, only a fool would say, oh no, he limps, therefore I'm not going to listen to him speak about God. Especially if he's pure, right? So for us it's like, big deal. But remember, in this context of medieval India, this was huge. It empowered, such an idea empowered anyone to have access to spirituality. No obstacle, no material obstacle, right? So let me read just a few passages from the commentary, okay? Now that I've read to you the verse, we'll just go to a few commentaries on the verse by Prabhupada. So, he says, for example, no one should criticize the bodily defects of a pure devotee. If there are such defects, they should be overlooked. I mean, even gentlemen and ladies, like, sometimes you walk in the street and there's some mother with a handicapped child, right? You don't you politely kind of smile and try to see so that the mother doesn't feel embarrassed or the kid doesn't feel embarrassed, right? So what to speak of someone who's, supposed to teach you about God and the soul, which is by definition beyond the body, right? What should be taken into account is the spiritual master's main business, which is devotion or devotional service, pure service to the Supreme Lord. So here you have sort of a barometer, a scientific barometer. Okay, who do I trust? Who do I listen to for spiritual advice? Right? And what's the criteria? If spirituality can be considered kind of like a science, then there should be some sort of criteria. So, you have criteria to find, I don't know, an orthodontist. He has a diploma, he's been to orthodontic school, and okay, he's got criteria. You can begin to trust him or her, right? And similarly with every sort of a lawyer, he has criteria. A spiritual teacher, what's the criteria? I really like his beard. It's just like, it flows, and it's just so, probably not, I like that he can, people get attracted to like magic tricks, even today there's some pretty famous spiritual leaders who have like, I don't know if you believe in, mystic powers, which seem to be very much studied by, alternative scientific research, levitation, people who can read minds, power of having effect on physical objects, going through doors and walls, and there's a whole body of studies about people who have like extrasensorial, powers, which are made into movies in Hollywood in the first place. That's not necessarily a qualification, Age is not necessarily a qualification. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, you have the example of Prahlad Maharaj, who's a teacher of spiritual wisdom. He's 7 years old. In the Bhagavad text, you have examples of animals who give spiritual advice. Like they're not even human, they're souls in animal bodies, and they give fantastic spiritual advice, So what really counts, as Prabhupada is saying here, is the person's main business, which is devotion to God, how dedicated he or she is to God, and how much he or she is trying his or her best to live a life dedicated to God in his or her life. And then whether that person again is poor or rich, educated, uneducated, it doesn't matter. What counts is the main thing, which is to serve God, So coming back to history, this is back to 1970s. Listen to what Prabhupada says, okay? Am I boring you? It's okay, it's not too boring yet? Great. Here Prabhupada is saying, one should not think, here is an American Swami. Swami means like a priest or a spiritual teacher. Here is an American Goswami, and discriminate against him. There is an undercurrent of protest. So this is written 1972, 1973. And before 1972, in India, the only people who were practicing Bhakti Yoga were people from India. And all of a sudden, in 1967, or 66, who arrives on the scene? Prabhupada, who had at age 70 taken this ship, this 90-day, 3-month trip all the way to New York at age 70 with no money, having 2 heart attacks, with this conviction that devotion to God or devotion to Krishna is not just for Indians. It's for everybody. And therefore I'm going to go to New York, I'm going to go to America and convince, New Yorkers about Krishna. And so he succeeds. And he gets tons of followers, and then he goes back to India with these young, blue-eyed, white-skinned Americans, and they shock the general people, and also they shock the Brahmin caste. So much so that some government agencies were trying to say that the early members of the Hare Krishna movement in India were part of the CIA. They were saying, this is not possible. They're actually CIA agents disguised as religious devotees of Krishna who are coming to India for so-called devotion to Krishna, but actually they're CIA trying to infiltrate the Indian government. So one of our teachers, Sri Dayananda Maharaj, said, yes, we are CIA. We're Chaitanya Intelligence Agency. Kind of funny. So Prabhupada is saying that there's this undercurrent of protest against our awarding the title Goswami to the American Vaishnavas of the Krishna consciousness movement. Sometimes people flatly tell the American devotees that their sannyas title or title of, Goswami or Brahmin, these are all sort of terms that kind of mean the same thing, is not bona fide. But according to the statement of Rupa Goswami in this verse, American Goswamis and a Goswami in a family of, caste Brahmins who are born family after family are non-different. Let me tell you a story. This is a cool story, and it has to do with reincarnation. Okay? Story about reincarnation related to Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, which illustrates this point. So this story, this anecdote, which takes place in sometime before 1977, you'll see how it relates to this theme of not judging others based on their appearance, and how it doesn't matter what family you're from, any situation, your love for God is what counts. Krishna supposedly appeared in a place called Vrindavan, about 90 minutes south of New Delhi. And it's a city which for thousands of years has had millions of people who are worshippers of Krishna. You love Vrindavan. We all love Vrindavan. And there are families of these caste Brahmins, caste priests, and there's some temples you cannot enter because you're white. And so one student of Prabhupada, went to one of the more famous temples of Vrindavan, and as you can see, like in the Hindu traditions in general, there is a pretty strong component of three-dimensional image worship, whether it's an actual form made of stone or metal or marble, or at least an image. I mean, you find that in the Catholic Church also with the Christ and statues of Mary, and they offer candles and incense. So you also find that in the Christian tradition, but it's really strongly pushed in the quote unquote Hindu traditions, including the tradition that worships Krishna. And so because of that, you have very old temples who are established since centuries, and where every day for the last hundreds of years, every day, several times a day, priests, and who are often coming in a family of traditions, have been offering food and offering flowers and offering incense to the main deity of the temple. So in Vrindavan, there's like 6 or 7 really important, famous temples. So this student of Prabhupada went to, and Prabhupada was in Vrindavan at the time, at the Hare Krishna temple in Vrindavan, and he went to one of these old temples, and according to the story, he was looking at the statue of Krishna with a lot of devotion, and the caste priest, the caste brahmana from that temple, noticed this young American and told him, I see that you have a lot of devotion for my deity. I mean, we believe that the deity is nobody's property. The deity is God. So, like, you are the property of the deity, not the other way around. Anyway, I see that you have a lot of devotion for my... You know the story? Oh, it's so cool. I love it. I see that you have a lot of devotion for my for my deity, so I bless you. I give you a blessing that in your next life, so we believe in reincarnation, so next life. So I bless you that in your next life, you can take birth here in Vrindavan, in my family, so that you can go actually on the altar and offer direct, offerings and service to the deity. Nice blessing. So according to the story, this boy ran, young, early 20s, ran to the ISKCON temple where Prabhupada was staying, and went into Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada, I was just at such and such temple, and the local priest, the Brahmin priest, blessed me that in my next life I can take birth here in India, in Vrindavan, in his family, and worship the deity. And according to the story, Prabhupada, very cool, said, well, you go back to that temple, and you tell him that Bhaktivedanta Swami, speaking about himself, blesses him that in his next life He can take birth in America and spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Fully illustrating this point from Rupa Goswami, that we're not talking about caste considerations, family considerations, color of skin, where you're born, nothing. We're talking about devotion to God. And spreading devotion to God is done anywhere and everywhere. And in one way, doing it in the West, in America, is even more of a privilege than worshipping the deity, even if it's a very famous old deity in Vrindavan, you know. So we should be inspired by these kind of statements, you know, because that gives us credibility that, you know, nothing can stop us from worshipping Krishna if you want. And of course, nothing is stopping us in Croatia. There's no caste Brahmins. I mean, in Poland, you know, the Catholic Church for some time was giving some problems, but they weren't saying, you know, they're not saying, oh, we can only worship Krishna, you cannot. No, they were saying, you know, this is a sect, blah, 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 blah. But there's really nothing stopping us here in the West for worshipping Krishna. And we should really have this conviction that devotion to Krishna, or devotion to God in general, is something for all of us. Is something that really is the birthright of all souls. That's it. Before we conclude, is there any question, any comment you want to discuss? It's clear?
I think for us it's so natural to think
Isn't
this
it?
way, but maybe for other people.
True. True.
But they will come.
Who will come?
Who is not here? Yes.
Yes.
Maybe not here, but you can escape your spiritual nature.
True. Well, we have free will. According to our tradition, we have free will. So theoretically, we can always remain disconnected from God.
Yeah, but not for so many long.
Not for so long.
One day,
Soon enough.
everything invites you home.
Mm.
1,000 years,
1,000
I mean,
lifetimes.
lives.
Right. Well said. You.
Just wanted to share when you were speaking about Ganges water. I've been in India first time in 2003 and I took some Ganges water. It's still with me at home and it's pure.
2003.
Yeah. Still has like really nice fresh smell. One can really see that it's special. It's not like just ordinary water.
It depends on the part of the river. When she's going out,
She got it.
it's
No, but
clean.
still, even if it.
Later is much more.
But still, even if she got it, and you didn't get it in
No,
like
I got it in
Gangotri.
Mayapur.
Gangotri is like the mouth of the Ganges. You didn't get it there. I mean, so, because even if you did get it there, after 2003? So that's 18 years.
And it's in plastic bottle, like
Plastic bottle.
Aquafina bottle.
Interesting. Well, shall we do a little kirtan?
Can you explain a little bit, because she's first time here, and maybe Krishna and what is devotional service and Bhakti Yoga, what is this, and I think seems to her like a little bit what's going
Krishna
on.
means God, right? I defined it at the beginning. Literally, Krishna means all attractive, infinitely beautiful. So, if God exists, then there's good chances that He must be unlimitedly beautiful, and and unlimitedly attractive. So that's literally what the word Krishna means. And Bhakti, I also translate, it means devotion. And so, you know, our sacred texts claim that all of us, and not just in this room, but I mean, actually in this room, theoretically, there's millions of souls, billions of souls. Between just me and you, there's like, you know, millions of souls in like little micro bodies.
Layers also.
What? layers of souls, and there's millions. So just here, and what to speak of all souls in Zagreb and in Croatia, on this planet, all souls are, with the word ontologically means like fundamentally, like something that you just can't change. Like fundamentally, ontologically, all souls are connected with God through love and through devotion and through service. That's why there's this famous statement, Jivera Sarup Hoya Krishnera Nityadas, that the function or the function of the soul is to serve God. That's our natural function, supposedly. But in happiness, and not just like, oh God, I gotta serve my boss again, like, because in this world we think, oh God, I have to serve someone who's going to exploit me and cheat me and take my time and take my service and give me just a few kunas, right? Or an exploitative husband or an exploitative, wife, ex itakodale, right? But here theoretically we're talking about pure service from the soul to God, and God, being able to reciprocate in a way that fills the soul with more happiness than the soul can experience, theoretically. So that's about bhakti, and so we're all about saying that we as souls are servants. So since we have to serve anyway, we might as well incorporate in our daily life, whatever career we have, whatever family situation we may be in, to incorporate a practice, which is what we're going to do now, this chanting of Krishna's names on a daily basis, so that we can remain connected to God in our original consciousness of being, lovers of God. You know what the word chow means, by the way? This guy who just called me before is a devotee from Italy, Govardhan Puja, and he explained to me, we were driving down to our farm, to our ISKCON farm in France, a place called New Mayapur. We were driving from the lake of Annecy 3 weeks ago, and he told me the word chow, before it's an old Italian, and before it was chow, then it just got shortened to chow, and it literally means, I'm your servant.
Ciao.
Yeah, chow means I'm your servant.
Che bello.
Que bello, huh? And you find that in Spanish, like para servirte, like you introduce yourself, what's your name? My name is, Juan, or my name is Rodrigo, para servirte, which literally means I'm here to serve you. And you say this in French also, à ton service. Probably in Croatian also, I bet.
I don't know about that. Maybe. Yes, actually.
We have
Nausluzi.
Nausluzi.
No.
I would like to, recently we had a discussion about what does it mean, because when you talk about serving others, usually people have expression or how to say,
Just like you did.
Impression.
When I said that, you're like, oh, okay.
The impression is that you are actually, how to say, that you are putting yourself in a position of being often misused in a different way, especially to history, the people of, so to say, higher order usually exploited those who were under them. And we discussed that maybe better term to explain devotional services, that as a from described that love is executed to the verb loving. That means doing something to please someone whom you love. So in this relationship between soul and God is loving devotional service. That means that out of love you want to please the object of your love, and God as such is anyway always serving everyone with love. So that means exchange of this attitude of trying to please someone. So it's maybe easier. this year. And out of love, you are ready to do any sacrifice for a person whom you love. That's the kind of...
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, let us do a little kirtan. You want to sing?
You play, I will sing.
I'll play. Okay.
You sing too, please.
Okay.
We will all sing.
How about I start for like 5 minutes? 5-10 minutes? Do a quick fun, and then you or whoever else wants to lead. So we'll just sing the Hare Krishna mantra for like 5-10 minutes, and then I forgot your name, sorry. And then Ivana can continue. You want to play kartal? Igor, can you play kartal? Huh?
You can play harmonium.
Play harmonium?
Yeah, Igor can play.
Okay.
No, I have to go. I have a yoga class. And,
Maybe I can play.
So you want to play Mrnanga?
Yeah.
Okay.
But someone needs to bring it. Can you bring?
can you actually explain what's going on when you are singing?
Yes. So this chanting is our bread and butter. And it's kind of like gospel music, Aretha Franklin style, where, there's a lead singer in church and then everyone says Amen. So in a similar way, we believe that the sound, the name of God is sound that is of a different scientific nature than ordinary sound like Coca-Cola or whatever. That the names of God, names of whatever God, whatever name of God there is a sound that is spiritual by nature and that goes directly to the soul, that touches really the soul. And so therefore we believe that by coming in contact with this sound, so when I'm singing the mantra, everyone's supposed to listen to my voice attentively, and then when I'm done singing, I listen to everybody's voice together, and then when I sing again, you listen to my voice, and then I listen to yours, and you listen to mine, I listen to yours. So it's an exercise in hearing. That's why it's called mantra or sonic meditation or mantra meditation, sound, sacred sound meditation. And by like this, locking in your ear really to the sound of the mantra, to the sound of God's name, you enter into a stage of yoga, literally, which means a stage of being connected to your source, to God. And that's when reawakening of sort of sleepy consciousness takes place, and your original love for God and your consciousness as a soul who's living inside a body awakens and blossoms more and more. And as a result, you become more happy and more peaceful and more fearless, because you're functioning, on that platform of you as a soul, which, as we say, we believe you are, And as Djokovic said the other day at the U.S. Open, I was so happy. Djokovic, Djokovic won a game, and so Andy Roddick, retired U.S. player, made a tweet on Twitter saying about Djokovic, first he takes out your feet, your legs, like because he's so good with endurance, and then he takes out your soul. Right? So the commentator said to Djokovic, and he's standing in front of 40,000 people, that what do you think of Andy Roddick's statement? He said that first Djoko takes out your legs, and then he takes out your soul. So everybody laughs, and then Djokovic said, well, I take that as a compliment. I agree with the first part, but the second part, I don't take anybody's soul away. And he got serious. He was joking, but he took it seriously. He said, I don't take anybody's soul away. Everybody has a soul, and we are all beautiful souls, and therefore I appreciate everybody.
Wow.
And when he said that, the whole auditorium clapped. That was really cool. Namaha Vishnu Padaya Krishna Saraswati Devi Gauravani Charini Vishesha Shunyavani Tastyapyai Chaitanya Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Vedanta Shivasari Gauravata Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare next singer, maybe? Our next singer?
You ask me? No, I can.
You want to sing?
You can play, I can sing.
But like I said, I don't know so many melodies. I only really just know.
Few.
Only know one. Like, right, that's the one I knew, and then you can just do the Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Really simple. Yeah?
Sing.
I just did.
Sing more.
Okay. I'll sing the mantra once, and then we repeat, and then you take over on the second. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama
That's all, folks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, Hridayanath, he's a Sanskrit scholar, you know? So he found the equivalent of the that's all, folks, in Sanskrit. Tatvam Danaha. I forgot the word. But
Srdačan pozdrav, puno hvala što ste sudjelovali, vi ovdje i vi ovdje. Vidimo se sutra uz Bhagavad Gitu.
that's all, folks.
Sljedeći tjedan nam u goste dolazi Kadama kanala s vami. Srijeda ili četvrtak.